Oh boy. Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee workshop. A little bit of standing water out here. Last week we had 3 inches of rain, and last night we had 3 inches of snow, which has quickly melted away. Well, if your emails and your letters are any indication, the projects that you like the most are the ones that accessorize and improve the workshop. So we've got a treat for you today. Today we'll have one of 2 episodes which will build such a project. I'll tell you all about it next, right here in the new Yankee workshop.
The new Yankee workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
Recently we rebuilt the west wall of the workshop. We called it the workshop hutch, but instead of storing teacups and saucers, we're storing glue and sandpaper, nails and small hand tools. It has a good work surface, and down below, plenty of storage in these full extension drawers, which are nice and deep, plenty of room for the power tools. They stay organized and, for the most part, dust-free. Now, this project was very popular and it's worked really well, so we decided maybe it's time to rebuild the south wall of the workshop. Now, I remember when we built this. It was about 10 or 12 years ago. Made it in about an hour and a half out of 2x4s and plywood. There are some things we like about it. There's some things that we don't. It's a great place for the miter saw. Bolted in place so it can't move around with extensions on each side. I created this cutout so I could see the saw clearly. Now, the bench also doubles as a support area for the radial arm, so I can put big, long timbers on this and make cuts or dados. Now, let me show you what's going on underneath. We have the compressor. We have this switch, which is very important. It controls the dust collection system for the entire workshop, and it's in a convenient location. We have our benchtop pocket hole cutter, and we have this hose, which is the dust collection for the table saw. Now, I would like it buried beneath the concrete, but it was an afterthought, and since there's tubing in this floor, we don't want to have to chip through that, so we live with this. Underneath the miter box, there's an additional pickup for the dust collection, this funnel right here. And it's great because it picks up all the loose dust that flies around the miter saw. We also have this barrel, which is important because I need a place to throw the scraps whenever I'm at this station. Up on the wall, we keep our nail guns. And as you can see, there's a lot of dust on them. And I'm afraid if dust gets inside the gun itself, it's going to shorten the life. So I think we need a better area to store those. I also store my dedicated mortiser. When I need it, I take it out, screw it down to the bench, and do all my mortising work. We also store cases with tools we use occasionally, special sanders, special drills, anything like that. We also store our trimmer for making picture frames. Over here, we have a benchtop drum sander, a grinder tucked away, and a small joiner. Now, the problem with this area is that things get disorganized and they get covered with dust. So I think it's time for a new design. We'll call it Miter Bench and Storage. If you'd like to build one, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. The first thing to do, take out the old bench. Before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. The base for our bench system is going to be made much like the base for the workshop hutch. It'll be a series of vertical plywood partitions put together with cleats. I find it useful to make plywood diagrams for all the various pieces that I'm going to need before I start the project, and this minimizes my waste. So for instance, in this piece, I'll get 2 end panels, a couple draw fronts, and a door. Now, to cut the pieces, I like to make some initial cuts with my small circular saw, using a straight edge as a guide. And please, you've been writing to us endlessly on our website about this clamp. and where to get it. If you look in the notes section of the New Yankee Workshop website, you'll find information on it, and generally you can get it through woodworker catalogs. You can also just use a clamp and a piece of straight wood and do the same thing. Now what I've done is put a mark at each end of the sheet where I want my straight edge, and I'll just clamp that in place, and then I'll cut it with the circular saw. Well, now it's just a matter of ripping and cutting until we get all the pieces we need. Tomorrow we'll start making the dados and the notches. Oh, good morning. Last night I completed cutting the panels for our base cabinets. And the first thing I want to do today is make rabbets and dados to receive the pieces that will hold them together. For instance, on this panel there'll be a rabbet at the top, a rabbet down the back edge, and one at the bottom. I make the rabbets and dados at the table saw using a dado. I don't want to damage my standard fence, so I have this sacrificial fence which drops over the top. Now I'll set this up, run a few samples, and then we'll be ready to go. All right, check my sample, and that's good. So now I'm ready to run the panels. Each of the intermediate panels needs some notches. And what the notches are for is to take these plywood cleats, which are going to tie all the pieces of the cabinet together. Because of a pre-existing condition of these conduits running along the wall, I need a cutout in all the panels. The panels are going to go together with glue and screws. Here I'm drilling a through hole with a countersink. The glue that I'm using is a standard carpenter's glue. It'll add a lot of strength to these joints. If I were to assemble this piece with just screws, it wouldn't work very well because I'm screwing in to the end grain. That's why I make sure that I use glue to strengthen the joint. Now I'm just going to take this part of the assembly, drop it to the floor, it's actually upside down, and attach this end panel with a couple of these cleats. This last cleat goes along the top back of the cabinet. It holds the cabinet together, and it gives me something to attach it to the wall with. With the cabinet assembled, now it's just a matter of attaching it to the wall along my level line. Because the concrete floor was a little uneven and the outer edge is a little higher than right here, I've shimmed the cabinets with some shimming shingles. I've glued them to each other and to the bottom of the cabinet. After they dry, I'll trim them off. Now it's time to start working on the framework of the top. It'll be made out of 2x4s, which will be set flat, and each intersection will be a half-lap joint. Now to make the half laps, I've installed the dado in the radial arm saw and set it up with a stop block, which will give me just the right length of half lap. Now we'll join all the pieces of the top frame at the half laps with some glue and some 1 1/4 inch screws. By building the 2x4 frame on the flat rather than on edge, I gain a little bit more storage space in the cabinets. Okay, now there's one more piece that's going to go across the front to join the two sections together. And that also gives me my recess for the miter box. I don't want to put that in yet. I have to make a notch for my central vac system, and I also have to remove some material for my dust collection system. Now that I've cut out for my pipes, I can put this remaining piece in. To secure the frame to the base, I'm drilling for some 2 1/2 inch screws, and they go down into the cleat that attaches the base to the wall. And to secure the top edge, I drive screws through the cabinet cleat into the frame. Well, as you can see, winter is not over yet, but it's nice and dry here in the workshop. And I'm getting started today working on the counter. And it starts out first being a piece of 3/4 inch CDX plywood, which I'll attach to the frame that I made yesterday with some 1 1/4 inch screws. Normally, I don't like to use CDX plywood for a work surface because it's too rough, but we're going to cover this. For the work surface, I'm using this material. It's a tempered hardboard. It's been around since I was a kid. It takes paint great, it's cheap, and all I'm going to do is secure it with a few 1-inch screws. That way it'll be easy to remove should I need to replace it. Now this hole is a port for our dust collector, which goes under the miter box. Not everyone will have one of these, but we really like it. My dedicated mortiser, which is an indispensable tool, will live right here in this compartment. When I need it, I'll just pull it out and bring it up to the bench top. Now, up until this point, I would drive a couple screws through the base into the countertop, and ultimately that ruined the countertop. So I have a different idea. What I'm going to do is cut out a piece of the counter, both the masonite and the plywood, and attach it to the mortising base. So then I sort of have a socket that I'll bring it over, drop it down, and then it won't be able to move around. I like to make rounded corners. It'll be easier to clean out the recess. Now I'll secure the plywood and then reinstall the hardboard. The next appliance has to do with the radial arm. Often I want to cut several pieces the same length. So I would screw a block of wood into the countertop, again causing damage to it. To resolve that problem, I'm going to recess a piece of this T-track into the top and have an adjustable stop on this bolt. To make the recess, I've set up a straight edge clamp, and I'm using my router with a 1/2 inch bit. I'll make one pass, move the straight edge, make another pass. Well, let's see how we did. That fits good. Now I'll just secure it with a few screws. Now I'm ready to take care of the edges of the miter bench, and I'm using some 1x3 poplar, and that's just going to get nailed on with some 6-penny finish nails. with this piece of scrap poplar. It's just a gauge to make sure I'm flush with the top. The outside corners of the trim are going to be mitered. And even though this is a bench, I like to take the time to cut slots for biscuits to keep these joints tight. When I run trim like this, generally I start at one point and run all the way to the end. I've mitered one end of the first long piece, and I'm going to use the biscuit dry to hold it there while I go down to the other end and make a mark for my miter. There are a lot of ways to cut miters. Here I'm using the table saw with the blade tilted to 45 degrees. The only glue that's going to make any difference here will be the glue I use on the joints. A chamfer will get rid of that sharp edge on the trim. Well, we're slowly getting it back together. Let's start getting to work on the drawers and pull-out trays, which will fill the bottom. They'll both be made out of half-inch plywood, cabinet-grade plywood. And by that I mean a multi-laminated plywood that has no voids. These short pieces are for trays. The tall pieces will be for deep drawers. The bottoms of the trays and the drawers will be half-inch plywood because they're going to be supporting a fair amount of weight. So the first thing to do is set up the dado to match the thickness of the plywood on the bottom, set the fence 3/4 of an inch away, and put a groove in all 4 pieces of each drawer. Let me show you the steps for the next setup. I want to make a dado at the back of each drawer side to receive the back of the box. Now, if you don't pay attention, you can really mess up here. You could get 2 right-hand sides or 2 left-hand sides. What I like to do is take the pair that I've already put the groove in, groove to groove, put a witness mark on this one and a witness mark on this one. Then I know I'll end up with a mirror image pair. Now, the procedure for cutting that dado is important also. It's not safe to run narrow stock through a dado or a saw blade just simply against the rip fence. If it moves a little bit, you're going to get kickback. So what I do is establish a stop block, which will give me the starting point to make the cut, and by using my miter gauge, I can safely push the piece through. I'm going to join the sides of the drawers to the front with dovetail joinery. The side pieces will get the tails. The front gets the pins, or the sockets into which the tails fit. And as you can see by the shape of the joint, this front is never going to pull off, and I have a lot of glue surface area. To make these dovetails, I'm going to use this jig, which has clamps and a template. When I got it from the manufacturer, I put it together and adjusted the template and these stops as specified in the instructions. This is for a 1/2 inch dovetail layout. Now, if there's a disadvantage to that, it's that you can't adjust the spacing. But there's one big advantage to this jig. I can cut the tails and the pins at the same time. I take my side piece with the inside out, this being the left side, goes in the left side of the jig. I slide it up till it's tight to the template and clamp it in place. Then I take the drawer front, inside facing up. This is the left-hand end, matching the left side. Slide it in against the stop and against the side piece. Lock it in place. When everything's secure, I take my router which has a collar and a dovetailing bit, and simply follow the template until all the pins and tails are cut. Okay, let's see how we did. Pop it out of the clamps. These kind of big pieces, we'll see how they fit together. Look at that. Perfect every time. Now I'm set up to do the right-hand side. Same procedure, but now I'm on the right-hand side of the jig. This dado in one of the drawer backs will allow me to subdivide the drawer space for tool storage. Well, now we're ready to do a little bit of assembly. First, I'm going to put one of the pull-out trays together. And the idea is to put a nice thin coating of glue on all the mating surfaces of the dovetail, and then just slip it together. A little bit of glue in the dados for the back. Now I can slip the bottom in. Now a few 1 1/4 inch brads into the back. I won't need any clamps, but I do want to check for squareness. 36 1/8 in that direction. 36 in that direction. So if I just give it a tap with my mallet, let's see, I want to go this way. 36 1/16. 36 1/16. We'll let that dry. Okay, 44 1/16 strong. That's good. Well, there are all our assembled drawers and trays. This last one that I made, we wanted to subdivide for storage of our nail guns. So along with the dados that I made in the sides and the back, I've taken some 1/2 inch plywood and put some dados, which just slide into the drawer sides, no glue. One here, another one here, and then I'll go across these areas with some pieces of 1/4 inch plywood. And that'll give us about 7 compartments for all our nailers and staplers. Let's start today by talking about the drawer hardware. This is full extension, heavy-duty hardware, rated for 100 pounds. Why full extension? Well, we don't want to have to reach under this overhang to get into the drawers. I want full access. You pay a little bit more for the full extension, but it's worth it. Now, the first thing that I had to do is figure the drawer size. And the manufacturer recommends to make the drawer box 1 inch smaller than the opening. And that allows room for the slides on each side. Now, when I install the slides, they actually come apart. You pop this small piece off. This goes on the drawer box, and this goes on inside the cabinet. It's recommended that we use these horizontal slots, 1 screw at the back, 1 at the front, and on the drawer, use the vertical slots, 1 at the back, 1 at the front. When everything's lined up, I fix it with just the round holes to lock it in place. Got one ready to go over here. Now, I like to use sticks to hold the slide where I want it instead of trying to hold it there and line it up with a pencil mark. So I put 1 stick at the front, 1 stick at the back, hold the slide nice and even, and drive a screw. Now, the first thing I did for the drawer box is put a line that's 1.25 inches up from the bottom, and that's the center of my slide. I hold the slide back from the face, about 1/8 of an inch, and once again use those vertical slots for the screws. That's good. Now for the draw front. You can see a line right here on each side of the carcass, and that's going to be the bottom edge. So I'm going to hold it up there, line it up with the pencil mark, and then put a couple brads into the draw box to hold it in place. Now I'm going to take a 1/8 inch shim, put it on top of the lower draw front, set that in place, and tack it to the lower draw box. Now I can pull the draw out and permanently attach the draw front to the box with a few screws. Now with this tray, there's not a lot of surface on the inside of the tray to attach the top, so I'm going to spin it around and get close to the bottom and put a screw underneath. And that takes care of the handle. Next, I want to build a shelf for our dedicated mortiser. So I have a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. I'm edging the front with this piece of poplar, and I'm going to install one of these pulls. Okay, that takes care of the part of the slide that goes in the cabinet. Now for the shelf, the slides have these little tabs that sit under the shelf. A few screws are all I need to hold it in place. That's good. Now we're going to cover this area with a door. I've already installed the hinges on the case. Now I'm going to hold the door, even with the top of the drawer, and put some screws in through the side. Okay, that takes care of the magnetic catch. Let's see how it works. Drop it in there. Yeah, that's going to be great. All right, now the next step is to secure the mortiser to the insert I made in the bench last time. The idea here is to secure the tool to a portion of the workbench so that I don't have to attach it every time with screws. So what I did last time was carefully cut out this insert. Now I want to attach the insert to the tool with some carriage bolts. That takes care of part one of the hole. The next thing I want to do is make a slight counterbore on the underside to receive the head of the bolt. Okay, drive the bolts through. See if we can set the mortiser right on them. And a washer and a nut on each side. Okay, that's nice and secure. Now the whole thing can drop back into the pocket, and that's good, but what I'm afraid of now is that as I do my mortising, I have to pull on this lever, and it's going to want to lift the whole assembly out of the bench. So we'll take it back out again, tip it up on the side, and I'm going to install a little piece of plywood, which is going to act like a lip, and it'll catch underneath the countertop. All right, let's try that. So now I have to tip it back slightly when I install it, slide it in, drop it down, and that solves that problem. That's not going anywhere. There's another issue that I have with the mortiser. It has a very short bed, so it's difficult to support long pieces, and I want to come up with a simple method. Here's what I devised. I've taken a piece of plywood, installed a couple dowels. I'm going to drill some holes in the bench that the dowels will drop into, and that'll give me some support. The plywood is the same height as the bed on the mortiser. Now, it may seem simple to just drill a couple dowels in, but to get them nice and square and to have the holes in the bench align with the holes in the support, it's easy to make a jig. The jig is made up of a piece of 2x4 with a groove down the middle. I slip the plywood in. Already drilled holes through it. I'll use this to drill the holes in the plywood and in the bench. I'm drilling the holes at the drill press, and the issue here is how to hold a narrow piece of plywood square to the table. So I've taken a piece of 2x4, which has a perfectly square corner, and I'm just going to clamp the pieces together with this little bar clamp, and I'll be ready to drill. Okay, now just a little bit of glue and some dowels. Now I've set the jig where I want the holes in the bench top, and now I'll just drill them through. Okay, let's give that a try. That's going to work great. Now this little block with 4 holes in it is to store the chisels and bits for the mortiser. Now the bit will fall out if I drill the hole all the way through, so they're only in there about an inch. A lot more convenient to use this tool. All right, now to fill the hole left behind when the mortiser is not in use, I made a blank out of some scraps that I had left over. That just sits in there like that. Well, hello again. For the last couple hours, I've started working on the extensions for our miter box. I know I have those nice factory-built ones that we removed last time, and they work fine. But I thought I'd take this opportunity to show you how to build some out of a little bit of plywood and some hardwood. Now, the first step is to join this shelf to the back in a dado. I want to machine that dado over at the table saw. Now, what I'm going to use is my stacked dado head cutter. I don't assume that the plywood is 3/4 of an inch thick. In fact, most plywood these days runs about just a hair under 3/4 of an inch. So I take that into account when I set up the dado. Then I run a sample to test the fit. I want it to be just snug, not too tight, not too loose, and that's good. The next thing that I want to do is clip the corners of the shelf, because when the miter gauge is over at 45 degrees, my hand would get jammed if I had come out square. Now, if my miter box is set up, I trim it on that, but we're not quite ready yet, so I'm going to use the table saw. Now, if I'm using a miter gauge to make a cut like this, a narrow standard gauge just isn't safe. The longer the fence, the safer it's going to be. Here I have a 25-inch fence. Lock it down at 45, and we're ready to go. And while we're at it, I'll clip the corner of the 1/4-inch bottom. Okay, let me show you how the pieces are going to go together. The shelf slips into the dado that I made in the back, and that'll get attached with some glue and some screws. And then there's a series of ribs that go underneath in this position, and they'll get attached with screws through the back and through the top. I want to pre-drill for all of those. Well, now I'm ready to start the assembly. A little bit of glue in that dado, and I can slip the pieces together. Now, what I'm trying to do is make this as light as possible. It's sort of like an airplane wing. strong but light. These ribs connect the back to the top. Okay, that takes care of the top and the back. Now for the bottom. And for the bottom, just a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, glued and attached with some staples. I like to use staples when attaching plywood in a project like this because you don't see them, and the two legs of the staple will hold a lot better than single-leg brads. The back edge of the extensions will be secured to the bench with these little clips and screws. Let me show you how I make them. I start out with some 1x1 stock, nibble away a notch, and then cut them to length. Okay, and that secures the back edge. These screws hold down the front edge. Now we're going to biscuit this piece of oak onto the table. The front gets closed in with a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. Before I can actually attach this oak strip, I need to make a rabbet so it'll fit over the front and be flush to the top. And now we'll get everything lined up, and with a little persuasion, drive it into place. I'll install a few clamps and let it dry before we move on to complete this fence. Well, today's the day we should finish our miter bench. I'm making some more refinements to the extension tables for the miter saw. I cut a piece of oak about 1.5 inches wide and made this shallow rabbet along one edge. That will lock over the plywood part of the fence. I'll attach it with some brads, and what it does is it gives me a nice piece along which I can run an adjustable stop, and it'll give me a place to attach a measuring tape. I want to remove this sharp edge along this top corner of the extension. And to do that, I'm using my chamfering bit. You may recall that when we had the factory-built extensions for the miter saw, I had this adjustable stop, which slipped over the fence and moved along the top rail. And there was a tape measure that I could lock it to, and that allowed me to make multiple cuts exactly the same length. Now, you could buy one of these from the factory, but we can make one out of wood and a few bolts. I'm beginning to form the inside piece of the stop. Now I'll smooth it up with a drum sander. Now that hole is for a 3/8-inch bolt, which will be attached to the handle. On the back side of this piece, I want to make a shallow mortise for a nut. I've just nibbled away a shallow dado in this piece of oak. This is going to ride on top of the fence. The relief is so that this won't rub on the measuring tape, wearing off the numbers. I've just nibbled away a notch on the end of the piece for this piece of plexiglass. I'm going to scribe an index mark in it. Okay, now I've scored a line, and we'll mark it with a pen. That's going to work great. And that should secure it. Okay, that secures the index to the inside piece of the stop. This is a part of a clamp to secure the stop. That secures this part of the clamp to the stop. Here's the other part of the clamp. I'm putting on a piece of rubber, and that'll prevent the stop from slipping. The two parts of the clamp pivot on a 1/4-inch carriage bolt. I drilled a through hole and a counterbore in the knob, a little bit of epoxy on the head of the carriage bolt, and that'll hold it in place. Now, the nut can just go into that mortise I made earlier dry, and then we screw the knob through. And this screw will be used to fine-tune the stop. This is an adhesive-backed measuring tape. You can read it from right to left, in other words, from the saw blade to the end of the stock. Now, this mark right here is a little more than 32 inches from the saw blade, so that's where I want to start sticking the tape to the top. And now for the stop. Clamp it in place, it's not going to go anywhere, and I can clearly read it. There's one more thing I want to do. Here are some of the parts for our scrap bin. This is going to be the back. It has a rabbet in each edge to receive the sides and a groove for the bottom. Here's one of the sides that also has a groove for the bottom. Slip them together, take a scrap to line up the dados. I can stand it up, and I'll pre-drill some holes for screws, which will secure it together. Now I'll just slide the bottom in. No glue here. And now for the casters, attached with screws. Well, let's take it out for a test drive. It's meant to store right here under the miter saw, and boy, is that going to be great for our bits of scrap. Well, there's one more thing I want to do, and that's make a stop for our radial arm, which will ride in this track that I installed a while ago. I've taken a piece of poplar, which will be the stop, and made a groove in it. That goes over the track. Now I want to glue in this piece of hardwood, and what that's going to do for me is keep the stop square to the track. Now all I need to do is drill a hole for the T-bolt and knob. I've left a little opening at the end of the track so I can slide in the T-bolt. Drop it down into the track, slide it to where I want, and sock it down. Now that's not going to go anywhere, and when I want to make repetitive cuts, butt the stock up against it, make as many as I want. Well, this is a long overdue upgrade for the workshop. We're delighted.